we're on the air. Oh, there we go. Hello, everybody. This is Steven Travers. I'm filling in for Harper LaBelle today. And this is 100 Yards of Football. And this is my Thursday segment, Take 5 with Steven Travers, which I'm honored to be able to do, courtesy of Vincent Turner. And our producer, tech man extraordinaire, is Mr. Logan Landers. And I am very proud. First of all, I'm very proud that we have Pat Jordan on, not just because we have Pat Jordan on for the great writer that he is, but it took some doing to be able to get him on Zoom and to get him onto a computer, because he's not a computer guy. But I was able to, along with Logan's help, get him onto the show. And I want to welcome Pat Jordan to this show. Pat, thank you so much for being a guest on Take 5 with Steven Travers.
Fine, Steve. You got to. I have to speak up a little louder for me.
Okay, I'll speak up a little louder. Is that a little better?
That's it. That's
okay.
Better.
Okay. All right. Now I'm just going to say this: Pat Jordan is one of the great baseball writers of all time. Anybody who really knows baseball knows this.
I got a question for you, Steve. Who's the other great baseball writer? Roger Angel?
I would, I had this conversation for 2 or 3 innings with a fan at Citi Field in New York about 3 years ago. Who is the greatest baseball writer? And the other guy was saying it's Roger Angel. And I love Roger Angel. Don't get me wrong, but I was arguing on your behalf. So I was.
Okay, I don't need you to argue on my behalf. Roger Angel knew nothing about baseball. He was a fan.
Well, that's true. I know he was a fan, but I personally liked that approach. I liked the fact that he went to the games and sat in the stands with his daughter and paid attention to the Mets rooters and all that kind of thing. I know that you were an insider who played the game, and we're going to get into that. But let me just say this. Pat Jordan is a very important person in my life. First of all, because of the books and the articles that he wrote when I was 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. And hold on. Sorry about that. Boy, we've had more little glitches today than you can shake a stick at. Anyway, first of all, because of the great work that Pat did, but also when I started writing, this is in 1994, Pat became a mentor of mine. Pat went out of his way to help me. And there were 3 people really during these years that were mentors of mine. There was Pat Jordan, there was Maury Allen, who was a great writer for the New York Post, and there was Bud Ferrillo, who had been the former sports editor of the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner and also was a radio personality in Los Angeles. And Pat and I have had a lifelong friendship, and I just love calling him and talking baseball, and he just loves it when we do it. So today we're doing it, but it's on the air. So again, thank you very much for being here, Pat. And let's just start.
I have so much on my plate at 84, Steve. You're lucky you got me enough time.
Well, I have you now, and I have a captive audience, and you're in South Carolina. Let's start from the beginning. Let's start with you growing up in Connecticut. Talk to me about your dad playing baseball. Let's get us into that.
My father had a very sad childhood. His mother was a 16-year-old Italian girl whose parents threw her out of Italy because she was a humiliation. And she went to Connecticut and had my father. And the day he was born, she signed the papers to put him in for adoption. And he went into not a reformatory, what do you call it?
Orphanage.
And he was there for 15 years. Never met his mother. Never had any relatives. When he was 15, they threw him out of the orphanage And in those days, the signs on all the businesses were help wanted, Italians need not apply. Okay. And he couldn't get a job. The only job he got was sweeping out a pool hall. And they let him sleep on the tables at night. And so naturally, in the morning when nobody was there, he got up and he started banging the balls around the table. And pretty soon he was the best pool shooter in Bridgeport, then in Connecticut, then in New England. He was Fast Eddie Felson before Eddie Felson, but he always liked Minnesota Fats better than Fast Eddie. My father was a great pool shot. I could never beat him. I was good, but I could never beat him. Funny story, he was in his 70s. I was in my 60s, early 60s. He was in his late 70s. And we played pool in Florida, and I had never beat him, and I always wanted to. And he would never let me win. I mean, he was not the kind of guy that throws the game for his son, you know. So I got him up because he taught me once, when you play an old guy, leave them long because their eyes go before the stroke. They always have the stroke, but their eyes go first. So I left them long. I was up like 90 to 65 or something. We were playing to 125. I finally realized I was beating my father. And then all of a sudden I realized I couldn't. And I threw the game. And the greatest accomplishment I had, my father never knew I threw the game to let him win. And when he found out, he was furious with me. He says, "You out-con your father, who's the best con man?" I says, "Well, you taught me, Dad. You taught me the con, so I used it against you." He was furious with me. He wouldn't talk to me for like a week. Anyway, but here's the greatest influence in my life. Only a fool or a child believes in perfect justice. There's no such thing as an accident, so is your fault. Do whatever you got to do, but don't get caught. Lessons I learned. I lived my whole life according to my old man's lessons. Never quit, which I never did. You know, I left baseball. I didn't quit, but 35 years later, I pitched a minor league baseball game.
That's right.
I wanted to prove I could do it once, right again. And I did it for one inning, 4 batters. So my father was a profound influence on me.
Now, as
he wasn't a very good father, by the way. He didn't have much interest in me, but he didn't mind giving. Like he said, there's only 3 vices in the world, kid: broads, booze, and gambling.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I never gambled, Dad, and I'm not a drinker." And I said, "That's all I'll say."
Yeah.
Anyway, that sums my entire childhood on up to when I left home.
Well, we still have the fact that you were probably, at least up until that time, probably the greatest high school pitcher in the history of Connecticut. So talk about playing baseball, realizing how good you were, and getting into high school, pitching against older players, and what a magnificent high school career you were able to amass.
All right. It was notable for all my strikeouts, but I wasn't a great winning pitcher. I was 17-4 over 3 years in high school. You know, I never had a good team. I struck out a lot of batters. I told you before, the first game I ever pitched when I was a freshman, I struck out 19 out of 21 and set a state record. And it wasn't broken until the Cincinnati relief pitcher from Connecticut, I forgot what his name was. He was a Cincinnati relief pitcher, probably 25 years after me. And he broke my record, striking out 20 out of 21. Mm-hmm. But it was strikeouts was what I was famous for. I didn't win games. I mean, every once in a while I'd hang a curveball and somebody. I pitched a no-hitter one game. Last inning, I walked a guy, hung a curveball, hit a double. I lost the game 1-0. No, I was not a great winning pitcher.
But you had the heat, which is what the scouts want. So tell us about how first the bird dogs and then the scouts, and slowly you learn this life of being a prospect as these people, these older gentlemen. And you've written about this in your book. These older men start coming around and ingratiating yourself to you and your family. And also the fact that this was a time in which you didn't just put down a prospect's name for a draft place. No. There was no draft. So you had to talk a young prospect into signing with your team, whether it's the Cincinnati Reds. Everyone is thinking New York Yankees, you're in Connecticut. Eventually it's another team. Talk about that process, if you would.
In those days, the day you graduated high school, all the scouts came to your house. In those days, there were 16 teams. 16 scouts were parked out front of my house. They would go in the front door, talk to my mother and father and me, what they were going to offer, then go out the side door, and then the next guy would come in. It would be all night long. The thing I found strange was all of them had the same number for my bonus. I mean, you'd expect somebody would offer me more, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like 40,000, 45,000. No, they were all the same number. It was like they were in collusion. You know what I mean? And I always wanted to be a Yankee anyway, because the Yankees were my first favorite team because they were all Italians. DiMaggio, Crissetti, Lazara, Berra, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Vic Raschi, they were all Italians.
Right.
And they were not wasps. Like the New York Giants were all the wasps. The Dodgers were all the blacks and Puerto Ricans and all that. They were a mixed race team. The Yankees were all Italian guys. So we were Yankee fans. I wanted to be a Yankee. Plus, when I was 12, the Yankees invited me to Yankee Stadium because in my last year of Little League, I pitched 6 games, struck out every batter but 2. So I struck out 18 batters, and then in 2 games, I struck out 17. One guy bunted, and they threw him out, and another guy hit a dribbler to short. He got a standing ovation. So the Yankees, somebody did a story on me in the Daily News, and the Yankees picked up on it, and Mel Allen invited me to Yankee Stadium. I was on the pregame show ahead of time, and where they filmed me. They talked to my mother and father. But I brought my baseball glove in a bag because I thought when they stopped talking, I was going to go throw for Casey Stengel, and he was going to give me a Yankee contract right there at the age of 12. Because he came up to me, he said, "I heard about you, kid." He said, "Your players don't need no gloves when you're pitching."
No,
and I had a glove in a brown bag. Nobody knew what it was. They never asked me to pitch. I was brokenhearted. I was going to sign with the Yankees at 12.
Okay, so
I was going to sign with them at 18 or 17 when I graduated.
Yeah.
But the Yankees were funny. They said they gave me an offer.
Yeah.
It was the same thing that the Braves, Cincinnati, and the White Sox gave me. But the Yankees gave it to me first. So they said, if you don't accept the offer, it'll be lower when you come around the second time. So I went to Cincinnati. They gave me the same offer. Went to Milwaukee. They gave me the same offer. And the White Sox gave me the same offer. So I went back with the Yankees, and they gave me $6,000 less now. So what the original offer, I lost $6,000 because I wandered around. At that point, I got so pissed off, I signed with the Braves. They had better looking uniforms with the tomahawk and the Indian and all that. And they were in Milwaukee at the time. And I spent 2 weeks with Warren Spahn and Burdett.
Wow.
And they took me under the wing. I would run wind sprints with them, and they would point out the chicks in the stands because there weren't many fans there, and they climbed over the railing in left field bleachers, climb up and talk to the girls. So when I went to spring training a year later, and Spahn was there, and I was with the Braves, he took me under his wing, and he tried to teach me a couple of things. But how could Warren Spahn teach anybody anything? That's like Ted Williams teaching you how to hit if you had Ted Williams' eyes, or Hank Aaron's going to teach you how to hit if you had Hank Aaron's wrists. So, and Warren Spahn the secret to Warren Spahn was his motion was perfect on every pitch. I mean, it's perfect. Like most young pitchers, they throw a great pitch, and then they follow through wrong. It's a ball, a wild pitch. But Spahn his motion was perfect. He'd be like a machine. I would just sit in the bullpen while he was warming up before a game, and he would just throw. And Del Crandall, I think, was his catcher. And he'd be catching, and he'd just put his elbow on his knee and the glove up, and he'd talk to the fans while the ball kept popping into his glove. You didn't have to look. And Spahn was almost 40 by then, so he didn't throw that hard. He did tell me, he said, watch this, I'm going to pitch 3 games in spring training, and I'm not going to give up a run, and I'm not going to throw as many strikes. So he did it. Pitched 3 innings, nobody got a hit. And all his pitches were off the plate. He'd get 3 and 2, he'd throw a little pitch off the plate, strike 3. So I said, how did you do that? He said, nobody's going to call Ted Williams out on strike 3, and nobody's going to call ball 4 on Warren Spahn. No umpire. He said, so he knew that he always got the corners because in other words, Spahn didn't miss the corner.
Yeah.
That's the umpire's rationale when Spahn was pitching. And if Ted Williams took a ball on the outside corner, it had to be a ball because his eyes were better than the umpires.
Absolutely.
So you can't be Ted Williams, you can't be Warren Spahn, and you also can't be Hank Aaron.
Yeah.
I mean, he could wait on the curveball until it's right at the plate, and then rip it over the third baseman's head. And he had a brother. Hank Aaron had a brother. I'm trying to remember his first name.
Tommy Aaron.
What?
Tommy Aaron.
Tommy Aaron. He was the first baseman. He tried to hit like Hank, but he didn't have the wrist, and he was pulling everything foul because he had to attack the ball early in order to make contact, and Hank didn't. And so Tommy was constantly pulling foul balls into the stands, and then when he hit it in fair play, he never had a career.
Yeah.
I played with him in the Winter League one year. Anyway, what else? Go ahead. I've been talking enough.
Well, okay. So you get into professional baseball. You are a huge prospect. Much is expected of you. The coaches, the scouts, the managers, your teammates are looking at you. You're a bonus baby. This is a guy who is expected to be at Milwaukee County Stadium pitching with Spahn within a couple of years. And you get into professional baseball, and it's not as easy as you thought. So talk about, getting into being with the Braves and playing in the South and all these experiences of league life.
It wasn't that it wasn't easy. It was that I thought I had to be a different pitcher because everybody told me how hard the professional baseball is. So literally, I wasn't throwing like I did when I was in high school. I threw beautifully, with effortlessly. Mm-hmm. But in the minor leagues, I was literally falling off the mound trying to throw so hard. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was over pitching because I thought I had to be better than I was in high school, which I didn't. you know. And then I got into bad habits, throwing badly my first year. My second year, I straightened out pretty good. I was averaging like 10 strikeouts a game, but I was walking a lot of guys, 7, 8 guys a game. And Roland Heeman, who was the scout for the Braves in the minor leagues, and I pitched a game. I pitched 4 innings, 9 strikeouts, 6, 7 walks, and got pulled out of the game. And I'm walking the street at midnight, you know, very depressed, and he pulls his car over. He calls me over. He says, "Don't get depressed, Pat." He says, "You got electric stuff." He says, "You're going to be a major leaguer someday." And Roland Heeman was one of the greatest scouts for players. And I said, I was the only guy he missed. He was dead wrong. The only guy who was wrong about. And then by my third year, I was so confused, changing my motion every other day, trying to throw the ball, that I got in a mess. You know, I was a mess. It was all mental. Nothing wrong with my arm ever.
Right.
It was a mental breakdown, really.
And you have said
too hyper a kid.
You said you actually once said you actually forgot how to pitch.
Oh yeah, I forgot how to pitch. If you saw me, you would say that wasn't the kid who was in high school. He's all screwed up. You know, it was like the Steve Blass syndrome, but I had it first. But I was nobody, so nobody ever made a big thing about it. Steve had it after the World Series. Bon McDaniel had it when he was a pitcher halfway through his rookie season when he was only 18 years old. Herb Score had it. When Herb Score got hit in the eye, when Herb Score was 21 pitcher and he was striking out 15 Yankees, Berra, Mantle, you know, everybody.
Sure.
After he got hit in the eye, something psychologically happened to him. And the following year, when you watched him pitch, he had the herky-jerkiest motion all screwed up. And everybody said, oh, it's because he hurt his eye. Well, it wasn't because it hurt his eye. It was because having hurt his eye screwed him up mentally. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And, you know, he couldn't throw the ball anywhere. I mean, he used to throw 100 miles an hour. He was lucky if he hit 90. Anyway, so there's a lot of us guys who had it.
Right.
And the St. Louis Cardinal pitcher in the World Series, the left-handed kid.
Yes.
What was his name?
Rick
Ankiel.
Ankiel, yes.
He was great.
Right.
Then he got in the World Series or the playoffs, whichever it was. All of a sudden, he's bouncing the ball 6 feet in front of the plate, throwing it over the backstop, and he could never pitch again. Made it as a hitter, and he was a good kid. I was doing a story on him. I was trying to explain to him that what was happening to him had happened to me, but he wouldn't listen because he didn't want to think anything mental was happening to him, you know? Mm-hmm. And him and Steve Blass never could do it. Steve Blass was a great kid.
Yeah. From your he was from your neck of the woods in Connecticut, too.
Yeah, up in Canaan, Connecticut, in the middle of nowhere, farm country.
Okay.
And one of the great guys in baseball. Phil Decrow was the best, and then Steve Blass was second.
Well, I would say you're one of the best in my book, Mr. Jordan. Now, Logan, if you would, pull up a photo of Pat's book, The Suitors of Spring. And I want to get to the fact that Pat did not make it in baseball. As great a prospect as he was, as great a prospect as you were, Pat, you did not succeed, and you were out of baseball. And we get to the late 1960s, and you start to write out of therapy, trying to determine why you had failed in baseball. So talk about this process You had gotten your education and you had done other things, and now, okay, you're going to look for answers through writing.
Right. I got when I was in college, at the end, the last 2 years, I was a sports writer at a local newspaper for high school kids and all that, and I liked it. It wasn't writing. I didn't think it was serious. But then along the way, I said I always wanted to write a book about how the Braves ruined my career, and so I started doing it. And I wrote about 50 pages. I sent it to Ray Cave at Sports Illustrated. I call it The Days of Wine and Bonuses. I have the original up in my attic. And he said, this is all right, he says, but it's too much self-pity. He said, you got to go back and rewrite it and try to think more clearly instead of just getting even with the Braves. So he gave me $400. He said, and when the next time you write this book, the $400 is for us to look at it first, Sports Illustrated. So I went back and started writing. And I sent him the first 50 pages at Thanksgiving. I remember he called me up on Thanksgiving. He said, don't stop. He said, don't do anything different. Just keep doing what you're doing. And what I was doing was not getting even with the Braves for ruining my career, but discover I ruined my career because of who I was. And it was a revelation because it made me see who I was. Because as a young kid, I never thought about anything but pitching. I mean, I couldn't talk about anything. I never read a book. So now it became therapy for me. And eventually I became, they used to call me at sports. Well, I said I was too moralistic all the time because I was doing therapy with other pitchers like Bo Belinsky. Mm-hmm. In other words, I didn't care what Bo Belinsky's curveball was like or fast. I was curious about how he became Bo Belinsky or how Tom Seaver became Tom Seaver. The fact that Seaver was one of the greatest pitchers of all time, that's one thing. But I was less interested in his record than I was interested in how he became this guy who was so disciplined and organized, and I wasn't.
Yeah.
And so I became almost every piece I ever did was therapy.
Yeah.
I've done Racist, a guy who was I went out to Idaho, where they had the neo-Nazi Congress, and I was there. And the guy Bob, forgot his last name. He was a leader of the neo-Nazis. He wanted to sign me up.
Was it Robert Metzger?
No, it was Robert. Bob. No, Metzger was one of them, but this was the big boss.
That's okay.
I forgot what his name was, but he ran the whole show.
Right. And
when he found out I was a writer and I was a conservative, which I always have been, he said we could use a guy like you in the movement. I said, yeah, but I'm Italian. I'm the mud race, because they used to call anybody like an Italian or Native American to the racists, they were mud raced. They weren't black, but they weren't white either. So I said, I'm the mud race. How could I get into your organization? He said, well, we'll make something. I'll get you in anyway. So but I had no interest. It was just an intellectual interest. But I was fascinated by this guy, and I went and did a story on him. Bob Miles. Mm-hmm. I think it's Bob Miles. And he lived in a little hole in the wall in Detroit. And I spent time with him up there. A fascinating man. And I wrote a story because I liked the guy. I mean, I wasn't a Nazi, and I wasn't a racist or anything, but I did a therapy piece with this guy.
Yeah.
And he loved it. He said, you know me. I said, oh, yeah, I know you. You're not. He said, I do all this other stuff for the racists just to keep them in line. He said, because I think the country needs a revolution and all that. He was more revolutionary than he was a racist. And he felt he had to use whoever he could use, the Ku Klux Klan or whatever. And so he told them what they wanted to hear. Fascinating guy. Problem was, he died before the story came out in GQ. They were going to send a guy up to take his picture. I called up, and his daughter, I think, answered the phone. She said, "Oh, my father died." And they never wrote. It was the best story I ever wrote that was never printed, because nobody else would print it because it was too non-vicious against this guy, because I liked the guy.
Yeah.
Another example. I'm a Catholic. I don't believe in abortion. Okay, period. You know, I just don't believe in it. I got an assignment from Playboy to do a 14-year-old black girl in Tampa who wants to have an abortion, and they won't let her because she thinks she's equipped. So I got her agent, who was a ACLU girl, and I said, "I want to interview her." She says, "Well," she says, "You're a Catholic. What are you going to?" I said, "I just want to talk to the girl." So I talked to the girl over the phone, the smartest kid I ever talked to, 14 years old. They told her, "You're too immature to make a judgment on whether you have this baby or not." She says, "Are you kidding me?" She says, "You want me to be a 14-year-old mother? And you think I'm too immature?" Anyway, she was so bright, and when she laid out her case for why she should have this abortion, I wrote a positive piece about the girl, but to me, she was the most interesting young person I'd ever met, even though I was 100% against what she was doing. Well, I never had a problem writing bad, negative pieces on people. I had more of a problem writing positive pieces because I couldn't hold myself back, and it would be obvious I liked them a lot.
Well, because you saw the humanity in people. People are not.
That's what I was looking for.
They're not cartoon characters. They're human beings with lots of different aspects to their lives and reasons they do things. And this is why, getting back to A False Spring, this is how you described your teammates, your managers, and the ancillary people that, the girls that are around the team. You infused them in that book with humanity and interest, charisma.
They were human. And that's what I had never understood that before until I wrote A False Spring, because I never thought of anybody else but me. I was Pat Jordan, the pitcher. Everybody kissed my ass. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't have to be charming in conversation when I was 18 years old. They all grown men who were offering me thousands of dollars to sign with the Braves or the Yankees were beside it with me. I was like a hero. And now when I was nobody, then I began to see me, and then I began to see all these other people that maybe other people would have seen as nobodies, but I saw them as real human beings. So that's why my failure in baseball was the best thing ever happened to me in my life. And it led me to become a self-analytical, which led me to become a writer. And that's what I've done for the last, 68, 78, 88, 98, 108, 118, 56, 57 years. That's all I've ever done.
Okay. Now, your next book is called The Suitors of Spring, but as I understand it, it starts off not as a book, but as a series of articles in Sports Illustrated. When was it originally supposed to be a book, or was that only later after you had printed a lot of these articles in SI?
A False Spring came first. And I felt that's when Sports Illustrated gave me a job. And they said, well, you could do all the pictures, because they had mapped me out as the picture writer, because I wrote, I pitched and all that. So the first guy I did was Tom Seaver, which was great because Tom Seaver and I talked about pitching over and over again. And we're relatively different personalities, but in a lot of ways we were alike. And so he became the first. That got a lot of play. So then I started doing Bo Belinsky, Johnny Singh.
Let's stick with Seaver, because I think this is one of the greatest articles ever written about an athlete, and I read it when I was about 13. So talk about, you decide you want to do Seaver. I think your editor thought he was boring, but you said, I don't think he's boring. He's exciting to me. And then you get to his house, you meet his wife, you play basketball with him. Give me some detail on Seaver, because this is a remarkable long form article that is later a chapter in the book, The Suitors of Spring. And Logan, if you would, The Suitors of Spring.
Tom Seaver and me, it's the other one.
About Tom Seaver and your relationship with him, and how often you spoke to him, and where did you go? Did you go to his house? And
now listen,
and all these different analogies and parables that come out of this article.
Wouldn't you assume that the failed baseball pitcher interviewing Tom Seaver, the greatest pitcher of the time, would do a hatchet job on him because he was so jealous?
Yeah.
Just the opposite. That was one of the most laudatory articles I ever wrote about a person, because I love Tom Seaver. From the minute I met, and we played basketball, beat each other up, and we talked pitching for 40 years. And I used to call him up at hotels after he pitched a bad game. I said, "You're not bending your back on the curveball." He said, "What do you know?" I said, "I know how to throw a curveball, and you don't." And the reason he couldn't throw a curveball because he was a drop and drive pitcher. You got too low to the ground. To throw a curveball, you got to be stand and fall, so that you're erect and your arm is going down, so that you could break off a curveball. Anyway, we would argue and talk and everything. It was just two guys. The only thing I envied him, I told him, I said, I envy you because you had all the discipline I didn't have. I says, I never envied your talent because I could throw better than you when I was a kid. But I envied you that you knew how to take your talent and turn it into something unbelievable, Yeah. And I took my talent and turned it into a disaster.
Let me ask you this, because in that article, you use these parables. Like, for instance, Seaver would look at the gulls flying on the beach in Florida, or he would say that his wine cellar consisted of each bottle of wine was a 20-win season, and 20 of these rows made up.
He had 20 rows of 20 bottles.
It was an incredible.
He had 20-win seasons when he was doing it. But I mean, that's how organized it was. Tom was not brilliant, but he knew how to be who he was, which a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
It took me, I'm still not there yet, but Tom knew how to be who he was. And I always admired, I have to admit, I admired him more than any man I ever met except for my father. And to this day, he was my idol. But I still threw harder than him, and it used to drive him nuts. Hey, I used to tell him all the time. I said I couldn't throw it over the plate. I said, but Tom, I threw harder than you. He said, yeah, in your dreams and all. One day we're at spring training in St. Petersburg. And Terry Tata came up. Terry Tata umpired against me in the Midwest League in 1960 when I was throwing good. And he's also a Waterbury Italian, like I was a Bridgeport Italian. So we used to hang out in the Midwest League when he came to town. And, we weren't supposed to fraternize, but we did. It didn't help me get him to call a strike on my pitches. I couldn't get him to do that. Anyway, so now I'm 32, interviewing Tom Seaver in spring training. We're behind the batting cage. And this little guy comes up. Terry Taylor was a AAA umpire going into his first year in the big leagues. And so I'm talking to Tom, and Terry comes up, starts talking to Tom, and he keeps looking at me, and I'm just watching batting practice, and those two guys are talking. Finally, he says, I know you. He says, I know you from somewhere. So it's like 13 years, 14 years since the last time I saw him. And I had a beard. So I said, yeah, Terry, remember the Midwest League in 1960? He said, Pat Jordan. He turned to Tom. He said, Tom, you wish you could bring it like this guy. And Tom swore to this day that I paid Terry $50 to say that because he couldn't admit it. I said, the only thing I ever said about me as a pitcher, Tom, is I threw hard on you. I never said I was better. I never said I was anything other than what I was, a failure. I said, but I did throw the ball hard. And the last time I met him, when I did the story when he was 73, and we were together in Calistoga, where he had his wine bid, the very last thing he said to me just before I left, he said, tell me the truth. And this is the only time I ever lied. And this was when he was getting a little dotty, because he was dementia, but he was claiming it was deer tick stuff.
Lyme disease.
And he said, did you really throw harder than me? It was a very sincere question on his part. And I lied. I said, no, Tom. I said, maybe 96, 97, but you threw 98, 99. I said, you threw harder than me. The only time I ever lied to Tom. That was the last thing I ever said to him. I couldn't, as long as he was healthy, I could argue with him all day long about who threw harder. But when I could see he was starting to lose it, I could never do that.
You had a real friendship with him, Pat.
Oh yeah, I would call him up. That I never brown nosed him. I wasn't like I was his buddy. But I could call up to talk to him. And when he was going, it's like if he was going bad, and he lived in Greenwich, I lived in Fairfield. So I saw him the other day. I said, you're doing a couple of things wrong. He says, yeah, I know. He says, what are you doing this afternoon? I said, I'm doing nothing. He says, come on up here. I'll make a steak. We'll sit outside and talk. And we would talk about his pitching. He'd ask me, what do you think? He would be serious now.
Yeah.
What am I doing wrong? I said, you're dropping too low. You're dropping drive. I know that's great for your fastball and all. I said, but you don't have a breaking ball. And you can't throw a changeup from that position either. I said, the thing with that from drop and drive was 90% fastball. Any other pitch, it didn't help. It took away from. So, like you look at Sandy Koufax, tall and fall, straight up over the top, a curveball that dropped 3 feet, a fastball that was lightning, Same thing with the pitcher that the Yankees had was wild. The fastball pitcher. Took him a while. He was on Tom Seaver's team. That's what happens when you get old. You forget.
Jerry Kuzman, Yankees pitcher?
No. Tom Seaver's pitcher with the Mets.
John Matlack, Jerry Koosman,
The fastball pitcher.
Dwight Gooden.
No, who was with Seaver.
Oh, Nolan Ryan.
Nolan Ryan.
Of course.
Nolan Ryan, right?
Of course. Who threw harder than both you or Tom Seaver.
And he had an overhand curveball that was unhittable.
Yeah.
And he was in the Hall of Fame. He won 300 games, right?
Of course.
He lost 280.
Mm-hmm.
Had the best stuff of any human being ever. How could you lose 280 with the stuff you had? I mean, Koufax always had like 26-5 records. Nolan Ryan was 18-17 with the greatest stuff ever. He was stupid. Whatchamacallit told me the catcher for the White Sox and the Red Sox,
Carlton
Fisk.
Fisk. Yeah.
I did a story on him. We went out. I said, "Who is the toughest pitcher to face?" We were at Hooters, getting chicken wings. All the girls with hot pants, right?
Of course.
The waitress come over. I was 50. He was 45. I was 55. I said, "Do you like old guys?" I said, you can pick for either one, 55, 45. She laughed. So we were talking, and I asked him, who was the toughest pitcher to ever face? He said, Nolan Ryan's without a doubt. He said, I never got a hit off him. He said, I was terrified. He said, you're standing at the plate, and the ball's coming at your head. You got two choices. It's a curveball. It's going to break over the plate, and if you don't go at it, you'll look ridiculous. And if it's a fastball and you don't go at it, you do go over the plate, you're dead. So those are your two choices when you face them. Right. When he threw a high fastball. And he said, and he was just mean enough to want to hit you in the head. So he said, I finally got a ground ball single off of Nolan Ryan. And Nolan Ryan was so pissed off, he threw over to first base 6 times. Now, Carlton Fisk is a catcher.
Yeah.
He never stole a base in his life.
No.
And I said, what did he do that for? He said he wanted to hit me. He said he threw low to try to hit me in the knees and the legs because he was so furious I got a hit off him. I said, you got 1 hit and 30 at-bats. He said he didn't care.
Yeah.
He said, that's why I was afraid of him.
That's what makes the great ones great. They have competitive nature above everybody else.
Oh, yeah. The Carlton Fisk was great. Carlton Fisk and Seaver look alike, and they're the same type of guy. Yeah. And when Seaver went to the White Sox, they went out to dinner, and a guy came up to him and asked Seaver for an autograph. He said, Mr. Fisk, would you give me your autograph? He mistook Seaver for Fisk. And Seaver said, you SOB, blah, blah, blah. He tore the paper up and threw it at the guy. And the guy left. And Carlton Fisk, he says, great. You're doing great for my image, Tom.
Yeah. Now he's going to go to
the Chicago fans that like me.
Yeah, Carlton Fisk snubbed me. Headlines.
Oh, yeah. It was, and Seaver was laughing. This is the kind of sense of humor he had.
Yeah.
He thought that was hysterical. They were the best.
Like Dom DiMaggio saying, I'm Ted Williams and you're not, and get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Okay,
look at him. That's a great picture.
That is a great picture. All right, listen.
Carlton Fisk was one of the great guys, too.
Well, yeah, I know. I don't know him, but I know Bill Spaceman Lee well, and he's told me many stories. All right, I want to switch gears for a second. And Logan, if you would, I have to apologize. I made an error earlier when I told you to put up the Suitors of Spring as the first picture. The first picture is A False Spring by Pat Jordan. If you want to put that up, just because I want to see it on the screen and give it credit to Pat. But Pat, there's one other article that you wrote for Sports Illustrated and was in the Suitors of Spring, and that is Bo Belinsky. Now, I can't think of two athletes on the face of the planet more different than Tom Seaver and Bo Belinsky. You've chosen Tom Seaver. Now you choose. Why do you choose? He's a loser at this point. He is out of baseball. He is living in a brothel as a beautiful loser and an alcoholic. Yeah. And you write simply the greatest human interest story that I've
because I wanted to find out how he managed to blow his career.
Yeah.
And then when I met him, I realized he wasn't as good as everybody thought. I mean, you do know he was the first Major League Baseball player in California history to pitch a no-hitter.
Correct.
And so that made him a big deal. And then I watched him throw a couple of times in film. I didn't think he was that good. He was no Tom Seaver.
No.
I mean, he was okay. He played in a team in the Florida, Alabama League, I forgot, with a bunch of Belinsky, Dalkowski, a couple other drinkers. The manager had a heart attack in the middle of the season because he had four guys who were always drunk and couldn't throw the ball over the plate. They drove him into the hospital, and he was the fourth best pitcher of those four guys. He was not. I think Bo, first of all, he didn't have the mentality to become a great pitcher anyway. But I don't think he had the stuff either. I think his whole personality in those days was so electric in a world of athletes who were boring. I mean, he was like the first really funny, interesting, hip athlete.
Right.
And people latched on to him. But I think as an actual pitcher, if he was able to harness his career, I don't think he would be much better than a 15 and 14 pitcher. He's not going to be Tom Seaver or not going to win big games. I mean, I saw him shoot pool once, and he was not a good pool shooter either. And he was a good drinker. But I liked him, but not. The story came out, people felt he was better than they thought. But I didn't think there was an awful lot there.
Now you meet him, and this you told me personally that you were in a brothel in the Hollywood Hills. Now that was not in the Sports Illustrated story. Did they tell you?
I remember, but I was.
Mention that?
Yeah, it was. Well, anyway, it was a house in the Hollywood Hills. Girls were coming in the door, going upstairs with guys, and then coming down 30 minutes, 40 minutes later, and the girl leaves. Up and down. What are they doing? There was a swimming pool out there. Nobody was in the swimming pool. And girls were there constantly in the house, all dressed in skimpy outfits, bikinis, whatever. Guys would come in, they'd go upstairs. Guys would come back down. The girls would go in the swimming pool. This went on all. I'm talking to Bo on the sofa in the living room. He's drinking, and I got a drink. That's one of the things Bo taught me. If I'm going to be a writer, I got to learn how to drink on a job, because if you're with a drinker, you're going to have to drink. And if you don't know how to drink, you're going to be falling on your face and you're not going to get the story. So he taught me that much. But we're sitting there drinking, and I'm like, this is going on and on. I'm getting distracted. No, it's definitely a cat house. The girls weren't not that great looking either. I mean, the girl who was supposed to be his girlfriend, she was no beauty queen. I mean, he was a slick guy, very slick, and I don't even think he was that smart. He just latched on to this Bo Belinsky persona, and he was playing it, and people were loving it because most athletes were boring. Tom Seaver was boring, not to me, but
not to me.
I mean, Joe DiMaggio was the most boring baseball player on the planet. My family loved him because he was a great Italian hero.
So, Pat, eventually you're in this house, you're with Bo, and Bo decides he wants to go out on the town. And you go out on the town, and you're in the Sunset Strip, and he's not getting tables. And eventually you
candy store.
And eventually you run into Hugh Hefner. Give us this amazing night at the candy store, and eventually Hugh Hefner and all these other people get invited to Hefner's mansion.
So Bo had about two or three guys hang around, a couple of girls, and Hefner invited them all to the house. Now this is a score for them, not for Bo, because he knew he was going out with one of the Playboy bunnies, Joe Collins, who was a sharp girl. He should have married her. She might have straightened him out. She was a smart cookie. Anyway, so he's there with me, and he was embarrassed because they were all his buddies were like trying to steal an ashtray or something that had Hefner's insignia on or whatever, and Bo was trying to give him a good time because Hefner had food brought out and booze and all that, and Bo was very disappointed in. I mean, his guys were small-time hustlers that he was with, and the girls too. I mean, the girls didn't stand a chance with Hefner because they weren't quality beauties, They were barely attractive. The girl Bo hung out with then. Anyway, I wrote it, and
Pat, I want to one more. As long as we're still on the subject of Playboy playmates, you played with a guy who's well known in baseball named Joe Torre, and Joe Torre married a Playboy playmate, and that didn't necessarily go very well. Are you willing to tell that story?
I absolutely will.
All right.
Joe Torre was impossible. I played on teams with him, and he was presenting this image as the golden Catholic boy, very religious. I mean, I was in with my wife, who had just flown in from Connecticut, and we were in St. Augustine. And what the hell was I doing there? I don't know, but Joe Torre was there. And Joe always had this image of being the golden boy because his brother, what the hell was his brother's name?
Frank
Torre was on the Braves. He was a mediocre first baseman. And Joe always was a good. It was Friday, and my wife had flown in, and she didn't want to eat fish, so I ordered a big steak for both of us. Yeah. And Joe Torre comes over. He says, "That's a mortal sin." Who the hell is he? Well, here's who the real Joe Torre marries this Playboy bunny, who is so outrageous that he came home one night or one day or whenever it was, and she was entertaining like 2 or 3 guys in their house and making no bones about it. That was his Playboy girl. Joe Torre was as phony as a $3 bill.
Okay. Now,
Oh, I couldn't say that. Should I say that?
Hey, this is Take 5 with Steven Travers, and we're all about truth, Justice and the
Truth,
American
Justice, and the American Way.
We've had Charles Young on this show talking about the 1970 USC Alabama game, and he said, should I talk about what really happened? We said, absolutely. This is a show where we talk about the real nuts and bolts. But we could talk about all the figures in your in the book, The Suitors of Spring. There were so many. There's Steve Dalkowski. There was Sam McDowell. And you could go on, and it would just take all afternoon. Maybe we should have you another time. But there was another pitcher, and this was after The Suitors of Spring, shortly thereafter. We mentioned him earlier, but you have a lot in common with him, and that's Steve Blass. And you did a story about Steve Blass and his problems. And please talk about that if you would.
Because he had my problems, he forgot how to pitch. That's all they ever said. Nobody ever analyzed it. They just said he forgot how to pitch. And that's basically what it did. Steve was a great guy. Canaan, Connecticut, I think. Way up in the middle of the left-hand corner of the state, farm country. And Steve was a good guy. I was thrilled for him when he had that World Series success, Then when I saw what was happened to him in spring training, I went to do a story on him. And Murtaugh, the manager, was trying to puff Steve up. I mean, Steve was pitching bad practice. He's throwing the ball over the screen, into the dirt, all over. You know what I mean? I could see.
For our listeners who may not know, he simply forgot how to. Here was a control pitcher, a 19-game winner, simply forgets how to throw strikes.
Me, Steve Blass, he was famous, so everybody noticed it. But I forgot how to pitch first. Actually, Von McDaniel forgot how to pitch first.
Yeah.
And then anyway, Murtaugh would say, "Oh, that's bad, but that's a nice pitch, Steve. You got it back. You're and doing all this phony talking." And and I'm looking at it. And I said, "This guy is done." I'm sorry for Steve, because I wouldn't want anybody to undergo what I did.
Right.
For 2.5 years. It was a terrible. I had a nervous break. I had to go to a shrink. Back in Connecticut, they sent me to a shrink. I thought I was going to lose it. And it was a Catholic priest. I had to talk with. He says, "Well, did you ever think God had other things planned for you?" I said, "No, never." I said, "God wants me to be a major league pitcher." I knew God wanted me to be a major league pitcher, but he must have forgot about me somewhere along the line. And I slipped past its attention,
Well,
greatest thing I ever had was failure.
Well, you needed to be humbled. God likes humbled people, and you had to be humbled, and that is what happened to you, and it increased your faith. Am I correct?
Yeah, I was humbled. I mean, you know what I did? What the hell? I got menial jobs. I dug ditches for a construction site. I did all kinds. I did every lousy. I was a mason laborer. I had to climb up ladders that were wavering in the wind because he's laying bricks on the third floor chimney, and I'm terrified, and I've got bricks in my arms. Yeah, I had a lousy job you could ever look for.
So have I. I've dug ditches. I've dug sewers. All work is honorable, Pat. Now yeah. I want to fast forward to another pitcher. This is a pitcher who I knew very well. He was a friend of mine. I used to hang out with him, and he had a lot of problems, just like you did and Steve Blass, and you wrote about it. And this is Barry Zito. You did a piece on him some years ago. Barry Zito, I believe you wrote for the New York Times about Barry Zito after he had come over to the Giants.
Oh, Barry Zito. Zito. Nice kid.
Yeah, talk about Barry and what was going on with him.
He's trying to think too much. Barry was trying to be an intellectual. I have to answer this. Hello? Barry Zito was a nice kid. And I went there, but he was trying to be an intellectual. You know what I mean? He was stretching, and he wasn't equipped. I mean, I was stupid, but I was smart, but I didn't know it and I didn't care. Barry was trying to be so much more intellectual than he probably was, and he was getting confused a little bit and as a pitcher. You know, he mapped out a reputation as like the counterculture guy.
Yes.
He played a guitar. You know, I don't know what other stuff. I think he smoked pot maybe or stuff like that before anybody did anything like. But he was a really good left-handed pitcher. But he was a nice kid, and I told him, I said, the same thing happened to me. I tried to think too much, Barry, and as a result, I messed up my career. I also think there was some problem with his mother and father.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was, because I didn't have much time with him. This was a short story. I think I spent like an hour or two with him in a room just talking to him. I didn't get to see him do much.
Right.
So I didn't really get nuts. All I just remembered is he was counterculture-ish, San Francisco, hippie, like the hippie baseball player, you know?
Right.
And I don't know if it was real or whether he was working at it.
Yeah, well, his mother ran a New Age pseudo-Christian church, which was not really Christianity. It was more self-help.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what you're getting at. A lot of these weird sort of countercultural ideas got into.
Yeah, that's the one thing I remember about Zito. And he was working at it. The whole counterculture thing.
Yeah, yeah. No, I knew him.
Playing the guitar.
I knew him at USC, and he was a good kid. He was a nice guy, but he was like, in some ways, you know, it's amazing. I wrote a story about him in 2011, and I opened it up because he was living in the Hollywood Hills, and I opened the story comparing Barry with another pitcher who was found in the Hollywood Hills in 1972, that being Bobulinski, found by you. And I wrote it up that way. And Barry didn't know what to make of it. You know, he was like, Bobulinski, who's this guy? He didn't know who he was. And the fact that they were both living in the Hollywood Hills, I thought was a great comparison. Both left-handers, both California pitchers. And there was
both, both were a little flaky. And both were trying to be a little something, like Bo was trying to be hip, just like Barry Zito. Barry Zito was trying to be intellectually hip, and Bo was trying to be outrageously hip.
That's correct.
With the broads and the drinking and all that kind of stuff. Barry was trying to prove he was intellectually hip.
You also wrote in The Suitors of Spring a great piece about Sudden Sam McDowell.
Sudden Sam.
Sudden, and I remember you were talking about like Reggie Jackson of the Oakland A's. Whenever it's McDowell's day to pitch, Reggie suddenly has a bad arm or something's wrong with him, and he's got to take himself out of the lineup. He was a Koufax level talent.
Sudden got drinking. He was a drinker. That was his problem. he overcame it, I guess.
He did.
But he drank.
Yeah.
And he's a big guy. Threw hard, just wild enough.
Yeah.
Not as wild as I was. I was wild too much. But he was just wild enough to make you scared, you know. And I checked his record recently, by the way. That's funny. You brought it up. I wanted to see if he was still alive. He's about a year or two younger than me. And he had some good, he really didn't fulfill his talent.
No.
I mean, he had some good seasons, but I mean, he was barely above 500. He really didn't even average a strikeout an inning. The kind of stuff he had, he should have been a good 50% better than he was. Suddenly, I interviewed him. He was not the brightest guy in the world either.
Well, we had a man named Bob Case on last week, and Bob was a guy who knew Bo Belinsky well, and Bob said that both Bo Belinsky and Sudden Sam McDowell saved his life in AA. Both of them, you met them in times of their life when they were drinking and having problems. Both of them rallied and found God and found sobriety, and really helped.
That's great for Yeah, I know. Bo did, and Gene Chance also, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
No, Gene Chance was a pitcher.
I met all those guys through Bob.
Sudden Sam lost his fastball very quick, too young, and he was suddenly not so Sudden Sam became his new name.
Okay, and lastly, before we let you go, and you've been with us almost 2 hours now, or hour and a half, there was a picture you wrote about, and this was also in Suitors of Spring, and many people don't know who he is. At one time, you had made him famous, and Sporting News had written about him, and his name is Steve Dalkowski. And people not know who Steve Dalkowski is.
Steve Dalkowski.
Amazing stories in all of baseball history. Tell us.
He's a Connecticut guy, like me.
He is, yeah.
Steve Dalkowski. I'm pitching in the Midwest League. My best year, I was striking out 10, 12 batters a game. Struck out 14. Go get the Sporting News the next day. Steve Dalkowski was pitching for in the Valley. One of those California leagues in the Valley.
Santa Barbara, I think.
Yeah, something like that. And I pick it up. Steve Dalkowski strikes out 22.
Yeah.
I struck out 14, and I thought I struck out every batter that I faced. He struck out 22, but he walked 18. He pitched a no-hitter once where he pitched a no-hitter and he lost 8-4. He was a tiny guy. He had these glasses there. He got his glasses, and he threw a short arm. I mean, he wasn't like a big, powerful Sam McDowell over the top.
Mm-hmm.
And he was famous, the fastest pitcher who ever lived.
Yes.
And
Nuke LaLoosh in the movie Bull Durham is based on.
I hated that movie.
He's based on Steve Dalkowski. So as you say, he's generally considered the fastest and wildest pitcher who ever lived.
Go check it. Did you ever look at his record?
Oh, sure.
Minor league record?
Yeah.
Strike out 23, walk 18, give up 9 runs, 2 hits. I mean, it was bizarre. He would pitch 8 innings, strike out 20, give up 18 walks, 2 hits, and lose 9-8.
And as fate would have it, was good friends with Bo Belinsky in the Orioles organization.
Oh, Dalkowski was with Belinsky down in that league, and Estrada. Estrada was the third one. Estrada, Delkowski, and Belinsky, and there was another one too.
Uh,
and they gave the manager a heart attack because they were all drinking all the time. And
Steve Barber.
Yes, there you go. Those are the four guys. And I think the guy's name was Fitzgerald, the manager. Have you track that down?
Well, the general manager was Paul Richards. I know that.
No, he wasn't Paul Richards.
Okay.
Richards. It was in an Alabama-Florida league game. Georgia, Alabama, Florida. One of those real low minor league. And the four guys were the wildest pitchers, the wildest characters, and they all threw BBs.
I think Earl Weaver might have been the manager.
No, it wasn't Earl Weaver. This guy's name, he was a long-term minor leaguer. It wasn't Earl Weaver. Right. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. I think his name was Fitzgerald.
Okay.
Ed Fitzgerald. He had a heart attack in the middle of the season because they said, what happened? He said, these four guys drove me crazy. He said, they're walking the ballpark. They're drinking like mad. They got women all over the place. He said, I couldn't control them.
Now, there was one story, I think you wrote this, and shed some light, but Delkowski comes up with the Orioles, and everyone is hearing these stories about this guy who's the hardest throwing pitcher of all. Throws harder than Herb Score. He throws harder than Bob Feller. Yeah. Hardest throwing pitcher anybody's ever seen. Ted Williams of the Red Sox says, "Well, I'm gonna check this guy out." Gets into the box. The pitch comes by.
It never happened.
It didn't happen.
Bogus story.
Okay.
And you know what? I wrote it. It was a bogus story. Ted Williams never faced Delkowski.
Really?
And I wrote that he did because I got it from some guy in the minor leagues. He said he told me about it, and another guy told me. It was one of those, those stories that never been proven.
Hearsay.
Yeah, that everybody knows this. Everybody knows the story, but it never happened. He never faced Delkowski. And the thing was, he took one pitch and put the bat down and said, I'm not going to hit against this guy.
That was the story.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's untrue.
Well,
it's one of those stories. It's so good, it has to be true.
It had to be true.
Yeah.
I mean, why would anybody want to hit against Delkowski and get killed? He knocked an umpire out. He hit him in the mask. Knocked him out, cold, unconscious. Okay. He threw a fastball through the home plate screen and scattered everybody watching the game behind home plate. Those are true stories.
He is
Steve Delkowski. And his best buddy was on my team, Kenny Cullum, in Nebraska, Midwest League. I was in the Midwest League in Duquesne, I think it was. Anyway.
McCook, Nebraska, I believe.
No, McCook, Nebraska. This is in the Midwest League. That's in the Nebraska State League. Oh. So Kenny Cullum was buddies with Delkowski. Kenny was drunk all day long. I was his caddy. I had to sober him up to get him on the bus. I had to try to keep him straight all the time, and he kicked it after he left baseball. And Kenny could have been a great baseball player. He was an outfielder. Went to UConn, and he grew up with Delkowski. Those two, Jesus.
Wow.
I'd be sleeping in bed at 3 a.m. We had the room in a house. He had one room, I had another room, and he'd come in drunk. And at 3 a.m, all of a sudden, I feel myself being pulled off the bed. He grabbed me by my feet, Kenny Cullum, pulled me off the bed. I go flat on the floor. He's drunk out of his mind. He said, I got to have another drink. Let's go. And he would wake me up at 3 a.m. to go someplace to have a drink. I didn't even drink. Minor leagues was fun.
Well, nobody ever wrote about the minor leagues like you did. And, you know, for me, you have to
The
understand.
minor leagues wasn't like it is today when I was there.
No,
The minor leagues was wild, was the Wild West. Today it's
it was. By the time I got to the minor leagues in 1981, it was changing, but there was still some of it left. And see, when I was a young baseball player coming up through high school and college, and I knew that at some point I would be in the minor leagues, your book was the primer for me. And I knew what to look for. I knew the stories that would happen, and I knew I would experience something like that. And in many cases, I did. Maybe not quite as colorful, but there were some interesting stories. And your book described professional baseball life in a way that made it so interesting and, you know, and tragic too.
Yeah.
You know, you're not always winning, and you know, it doesn't always have a happy ending. And, you know, you meet some of these girls and some of them are a little vicious, but it was so interesting, and I was prepared for it when it came my time to play and had a few years. And I just want to say, Pat, you were such an influence, but we're going to have to shut the program down.
Yeah, I've got to go. I got to go someplace.
I want to thank you so much for being my guest and my friend.
My pleasure.
And thank you so much for your time, and God bless you. And boy, I tell you, if you're into fans out there listening, you want to read some really great writing, I recommend A False Spring, The Suitors of Spring, or simply just go to Sports Illustrated. They have a vault, and look up Pat Jordan and read all his great articles about Sam McDowell, Steve Dalkowski, Bo Belinsky, Tom Seaver, and even some unknown people. You wrote an article about a high school kid in Fairfield, Connecticut that was fabulous. And so thank you very much for your contribution to writing and to baseball and to my life. Thank you, Pat Jordan.
My pleasure. Take care.
God bless you.